Welcome to video lesson number 8 in Module 215, Advanced Behavior Management and Programming. And this is our last of the videos about pervasive techniques. And sometimes I think of this as a separate category of pervasive techniques, and in other times I kind of lump it in talking about lifestyle. Really doesn't matter to me how you think about it. So this will be the last video on these techniques, and then after that we'll start to look at some particularly common behaviors and some of the tools we used as we address those. So in this category, we're going to talk about the social life of people, or the social choices that people have, and the role that they play in shaping people's behavior. And this starts with a bit of assessment, as is always the case. We have to really kind of think about how is this person social and how social is this person. They sound similar, but they're not the same question. Some people really are social. They like to have lots of human interactions. And think about how the number of people that they have, the amount of time that they spend in social interactions. But the other thing we need to know is just how do people like to socialize? Some people really like to be on their own. Some people like to be in one-person groups or have just one close friend. Some people really enjoy being with their family. Other people are very uncomfortable with their family. So we want to avoid, again, this one-size-fits-all or prescriptive approach and really do some assessing. How do we do that assessing? Well, again, we ask the person if we can. We also look at the person's records, talk to stakeholders who know the people, and observe and record for ourselves, making adjustments as we go along. So there are lots of different ways that we can get a sense of what works for that person. We also want to take a look at the times when that person likes to socialize. For example, there are often complaints with people at work or at school wanting to socialize too much. And I always think this is a bit of a mystery. If you ask almost any child, particularly middle schoolers and secondary school kids, why they are there, they'll tell you it's because of their friends. So I don't know why we would want to stamp out the social interactions that kids get to have when they're in school, when that's the one compelling reason for them to be there. And it's also important for us to realize that almost everything that we learn gets distilled down to how we can use it to build better relationships in our lives. So getting rid of the social makes no sense at all. Instead, I would say, how can we build it in to these other activities? Very similar to what we talked about around the PREMAC principle in the prior video. How can I make the less social activity lead to the more social activity? Or can I make something that at first blush doesn't seem social into a social activity? For example, using buddies as a way of getting kids to learn to read is a fantastic approach. It's both social and academically, it's a very sound idea. So kids develop the reading skill, and they also develop a whole bunch of social skills, and they have fun and get something rewarding out of it. It's a win-win-win. Not just thinking about when the person likes to socialize in terms of location, we may also think about the times of the day the person likes to socialize. For example, if you start getting really loud and interactive with me in the morning, I'm going to probably respond in an irritated way. But if you want to call me at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at the night and you're a friend of mine, we're probably going to have a great conversation. So that's really quite common for people. Again, some people really like to get loud and socialize in a loud way. Other people are never happier than if they're just walking beside their best friend or puttering in a garden. Some people just like to go to the movies with somebody and sit in their presence. Some people cannot wait to be active, out for a jog or going for a hike with somebody. While others, again, just like to sit on the couch and sip wine. Think about how you would build that into your life, and think about finding that same type of individualization for the people we support. Think about whether they do well in small groups, in crowds, or one-on-one. And one of the things that I've come to understand is that almost every person I supported was highly motivated by having some one-to-one time. Chances are that you very rarely go out in large groups, and in particular, large groups of people who are not your relatives. If you're going out in a group, chances are it's with somebody who's related to you. The people that we support are very different than this. They're always on, essentially, a field trip. They're always grocery shopping with their roommates. They're always out at a job with everybody from their job. They're always in school with a huge group of strangers. And so there's no surprise, I should say, that people really want to have smaller, more intimate interactions. And by intimate, I don't mean sexual. I mean closer or more personal and more flexible as well. And They also recognize that you as the staff person are kind of the star of the scene. And in the same way as when you were a little kid, you might have been amazed to see a teacher out in the community, or to be able to see your teacher in a setting outside of school and have them recognize you. It's a little bit like running into a celebrity. Well, for the people that we work, it'll be very similar. They really like to have that one-on-one time because for them, it's rewarding, it's reinforcing, and says to them that they're worthwhile people. So don't always put people in large groups. Think about the size of groups that work for people and give them a variety. You also want to think about the preferences people have in their life. Don't make the assumption that everybody's happy with their family. And I think it's a really cruel thing to tell people that they have to be with their family, they have to like their family. That just isn't the case for many, many, many people. And in some cases, there are deep and profound and hurtful reasons why people have decided being with their family is something they'd rather not do, or that they'd rather have limits set around. This can be a challenge, and you might need to get help from supervisors or senior staff people if you're working with somebody who really doesn't want to be with their family, particularly when it's an adult. Children often don't have this choice. So how do I navigate around that? That's going to take a deft hand, but there are ways to do it. For example, I worked with an individual who was raised in a Jehovah's Witness home, and she didn't want us to tell her parents that she wanted to participate in Christmas in the home. And after working with our supervisory team, we agreed. That's fine. She can just simply tell her family that she doesn't want to come home over Christmas holidays, and the rest is her own personal business. She was a 34-year-old adult. So make sure that you're not just telling people they have to do these things out of some obligatory thing or out of some false belief that it will automatically make all people happy. Some people just aren't happy that way. And how many people just like you are in the client's life? What I mean by that is, how many people who have the exact same role as a staff person are there? If you think about the people that you have in your life, I'll bet you have friends who are good for just goofing around with, friends that are good for certain activities, such as going skiing or going out to do nature activities with, other people you call when you really need a smart person to give you advice, and other people who are just good because they know how to listen to you when you want to kind of ventilate. And I'm sure there are plenty other examples. So the people we're supporting need to have those same types of relationships in their lives. They need their gym buddy and their church buddy and their watching dumb TV shows buddy. And think about ways that you can create that for people. Don't make too much of the relationship with roommates. We often try to make people do things with their roommates when you and I probably wouldn't. Many of us have had roommates in our lives and really had almost no connection with that person beyond the physical. If you have more than that, that's great, but I wouldn't describe it as typical or required. So often we see people with too much time together, and giving people an opportunity to separate or do things differently is incredibly important. We assume people need to eat at the same time, go to the bed at the same time, have their baths at the same time of the day, and that's just not true. And on the other hand, sometimes people need ways for working out things, mechanisms for making sure that they aren't in conflict. Something as simple as labeling their towels or having people work through mediated discussions can make a big difference, and again, reducing conflict. And teaching people about privacy rules can also really matter. One of the ideas that I'm going to kind of introduce in this subject of social life is case management. Now, we've already introduced this idea a little bit in our planning module by talking about that stakeholder meeting, all the people around the table. But we're going to build on that idea, and we're going to incorporate something that's called a circle of support, although there are many other ways that this is described. Sometimes they're called case management tables. But I find that to be a very technical and cold-sounding term. The term circle of support really, I think, describes things far better. So this is an element of the biopsychosocial rehabilitation model we talked about before. The idea that as much as possible, we would help people to be supported by or surrounded by people that had their best interests at heart and that would be there in the long term. So this means that the individual themselves is a part of that table. And at first they may have a relatively limited role. But our aim is to constantly evolve that role and help the person have as much control as possible. They are at the helm. We often draw them as being in the middle of the circle, or we give them names such as the leader or the captain. We don't call them the supported person, we call them the leader because everybody else is supposed to be doing that individual's bidding or being supportive to them. The whole idea is developing ownership, motivating people to keep on working on things that are challenging. Throughout these videos, I've been using the term challenging behavior as though it's challenging for us as the staff people or the community members who are around it. And that's true, it is sometimes. But it's also challenging for the other person. Dysfunctional behavior has a cost for the other person. And the more that we help them to find behavior that's functional, the more they'll be happy as well. So helping people to be owners in their own lives is fundamental to giving them the fuel and the motivation to go through this work that can be very challenging. It's also important from a case management perspective that this circle of support gathers so that we can really monitor what's going on. Sometimes one person around the table can see things that others can't. Perhaps it's the family where the individual goes and visits on the weekend. And maybe suddenly when that person visits, they tell something that doesn't get told elsewhere or show something that doesn't get shown. All that information, all that support helps us to adjust better. And in particular, it helps us to do transitional planning well. I don't have transitional planning on this slide, but it's important to think about. Transitions are oftentimes when we lose people. We often think of them as graduations when we're the staff person. Oh, you're graduating from grade 6 into grade 7 at middle school. But to that child, that's both a moment of some pleasure and often at least a moment of some fear, if not more a moment of some fear. They've just finished something and now they have to start over. All of their relationships are coming to an end. It's scary and new. All of those things are reasons why people need sustained circles of support that are going to be there even when they leave one place and go someplace else. And that circle of support can do even more than just be there. It can actively anticipate transitions and plan how it will help the person through them. Simple things like visiting the new school or getting connected to teachers or other mentors or peers in the school might be a huge difference maker in making that transition go smoothly. Sharing information, sharing procedures, giving tips and hints. What does this person prefer? Can also be a big part of things and helping them to be advocates as well. Professionals and non-professionals need to be a part of this social circle of support, and they need to gather in both formal and informal ways. Not always together. Sometimes a person has one of their circle of support people come over for a barbecue, to work in the garden, or have a cup of tea, or maybe they go and visit them. I had people who had their circle of support include the person who took them to church every Saturday or Sunday morning, I should say. So it can be really kind of loose throughout the year, but it's not just once a year that we get these people together. They need to really have meaningful relationship so that they are genuinely part of the support team and genuinely know what's going on in that person's life. Sometimes we can have larger gatherings like parties or barbecues, but it's not necessary to always do the big ticket item. Think in simple ways of keeping people connected. And literally, I've been at times in my homes when I've been working in homes or programs when individuals were out and every single person was gone. Some of them were at their friends. Some of them were with their families. Some of them were with volunteering someplace or doing some kind of church activity. And I sat back getting paid to do not much more than catch up on my paperwork and knowing that in that moment I was probably doing the best work I'd done in years because everybody was out living their best life and behavior was simply not a problem. So think about case management as a part of this circle of, or this social circle that we've talked about. How can you create it for people? Sometimes it's difficult to get organizations to think of this in a structured and organized fashion. So even if you can only approximate this by having more people in this individual's life and getting their input throughout the year in some informal way, that's still a good thing to do. Think about friends, past staff, neighbors, relatives, people who went to school with this person. Just about anybody who has a personal connection can join the professionals, the social workers, the medical staff, the therapeutic professionals, and the other CSWs in this person's life. When you put that all together, you get a pretty potent social tool for people. All right, that's going to wrap up this video and most of our discussion around pervasive methods. We'll start talking about some common behaviors and some common resolutions for those behaviors as we continue.